Okay, so good evening, everybody, and welcome to another digital edition of the Philosophical Theater Online, which has been happening during April. We had lots of interesting guests. Srećko Horvat and I were talking with Oliver Frljić, with Anja Suša, with Milo Rao, and tonight it's a great pleasure to have with us Stefan Kaegi, one of the, I think, most known artists that come to the Beta Festival, because we've seen a lot of your shows at the Beta Festival. He's a theater maker. He creates documentary plays, audio installations in urban environments. Also is one of the founders of Rimini Protocol, a theater collective that we have seen at the Beta Festival. There are shows like Remote X, Cargo Sofia, Airport Kids, Capital, Nahlas, Peace en Person, which won the Grand Prix Mira Trailović at the 52nd Beta Festival. It was in 2018, right? And so, yeah. So good evening, Stefan. How are you? How are you dealing with the whole pandemic crisis? Are you in self-isolation? How is the situation in Switzerland?
Well, we are a bit more lucky, I understand, at the moment than in Belgrade, because we are allowed to walk out. Actually, we've never been stopped from going outside, which is a privilege here. I'm in Lausanne, close to the Lake of Geneva, so I shouldn't probably tell you that I was swimming last week.
No, you
it just makes you unhappy in your confinement. But obviously people keep distances, and everything that moves was basically stopped in the commercial part as well as in the whole cultural thing. So I spent so many weeks now without stepping out of the city that I have never, I'm normally very nomadic. I change city normally at least once a week. And that has completely changed. I also normally spend every evening somewhere out there, even either rehearsing or watching other theater performances or discussing with people. And
yeah,
I guess.
Yes, okay. Can you tell me one thing? Are you inspired by this situation? Because most artists, I think at the beginning of this pandemic, were pretty much eager to do something with the team, and were like, okay, great, now I'm going to write something, or, you know, think of a project or something. Are you now thinking of doing something that deals with the coronavirus issues, or not? Or are you just working on recent projects?
Well, if I was a novelist, it would be a perfect moment, certainly. And my friends that are video makers say, finally, I can focus, I can finish all these editings I have to do. That's not my, yeah, I found that more than ever in these days, how much I really am somebody that works not out of an inspiration in a white cube, not out of a closed theater. I really create out of the people I'm together with, and I create, I get inspired moving and going to places. So the beginning was very hard because we had a lot of shows canceled. It would have been a super busy time now in spring for us. I would have been performed, directed last week in New York, 100% Brooklyn, for instance, a project we've been preparing for half a year, finding 100 people to be on stage, and now this didn't happen. We would have had the premiere 3 days after the lockdown of my new French version of Society Under Construction, which hasn't seen an audience until now, and we don't know when it will. So in the beginning it was really quite a shock. Then as things went on, I started to realize I really, besides all the administrative things that happen now, that for the company we have to fight for finding somehow money to pay the people that now cannot do the touring, that have reserved time for us. But I cannot only do this. So in my other mind, I started creating things, very little things. I made a little audio tour for homes. I started now, even that slowly things start to open up, to think how this opening up of the theaters can lead to something creative.
Yeah, well, I know because of all the shows I've already seen of yours, I think that it will be very inspiring for you to see how you're going to deal with the social distancing, with the public spaces. So I'm very interested what will happen in the future in your project. But now I will go maybe 2 years before, because I was very inspired by your show, which I didn't see, but I read about it on your website, and the topics that it deals with, I think, will be very interesting to see with the situation we are dealing with now. It's Stat 1 to 4, State 1 to 4, a tetralogy which you created, which Rimini Protocol created from 2016 to 2018. I think we can talk about all 4 shows because they're very interesting, dealing with topics like global surveillance, like building social structures and construction sites, technology and digital reality, and also about the corporations that are on top of the pyramid. But before that, if you are okay with that, I would read a little text by Boris Budin, who wrote a text for your program, for the show, and I think it's probably very inspiring to deal with the issues today. Democracy has become a sort of a divine value, although not everyone is blessed equally by its grace. The more angelic it becomes, the more it turns culturally particular. The only true democracy is Western democracy, universal when imposed on the weak and poor, but particular when it defends the privileges of the rich and powerful. This, however, does not make it any less sublime. On the contrary, the notion of democracy evoked today in the West has reached a level of such angelic sublimity that legitimately we might ask whether there is anything human in it. Is it mortal as humans are? If it was ever born, does it mean that it might also one day die? Does anyone know when this day might come? Does anyone know whether this day has already come without anyone noticing it yet? So I think that today, more than ever, we are in a way witnessing the death of Western democracy, the way it dealt with the coronavirus pandemic, the way we see the division is between the poor and the rich, the North and the South. We see Fortress Europe, the European Union being a bigger fortress than any time before. We see the lack of solidarity between countries. We see the complete devastation of some healthcare systems. We see a lot of bad things happening now in the world, and the so-called democracies were not able to deal with it. Even now we can see that a small island like Cuba, socialist country actually, showed much more solidarity than many countries in the European Union, sending doctors and medicine and showing some respect to other countries. So what is your take on that? And I would start maybe with a question, what do you think, is the Western democracy already dead?
I wouldn't, no, I wouldn't say that. We did this whole project because we were interested in the phenomenon of post-democracy that is very rightly accused by Budin when he says not everybody participates, and we identified some very specific problems where the elected people don't control the things anymore in a way that we wanted them to be elected for. For instance, the secret services that's the topic of one project that we did another one about, and I know Belgrade knows a lot about it, about construction sites and how our cities transform in ways that we don't control anymore. The third project of our series was about internet and democracy, where sudden powers are handed over to majorities that suddenly come up. And the fourth one is about lobbyism, that is a strong player in this as well. But even though we did these projects where we heavily criticize the way democracies are not really managing to be as democratic as they should, I also see a certain danger in this general blaming of whomever is in position of representing majorities. I am personally somebody that does believe in representative democracy, and who is even in a situation like in Brazil at the moment, where obviously you have a horrible leader with terrific homophobic opinions and completely protected from any kind of expert recommending him things, kicking out his health minister, and then but still in this situation, I wouldn't want to support what many Brazilians then say, okay, let's call the military to then kind of wrap it all up, because all politicians are wrong, all politicians are corrupt. I think this is not, let's look at complex topics with complex responses, and let's not try to simplify that too easy. And I think I'm here in Switzerland, and we, have here this direct democracy that people that hate representative democracy, they always say we have to do it like in Switzerland, we have to vote about everything, let's ask the people what they think. And I'm not very positive about this system, because I've seen here people deciding in majorities about
terrible things.
Yeah, I mean, if the majority here has forbidden minarets construction, absurd things like these. The majority here has voted against freedom of movement, that is part of our deal that we had with the European Union. And you see that as soon as you kind of ask people without giving them time to think and making them think, it might be more dangerous than the representative.
And what about the democratic values? Do you think the values are dead? Not democracy by itself, but the values that of democracy that are supposed to be part of the politics of the European Union. What is your thought on that? What do you think? What is your thought on how Europe dealt with this crisis now, when you see it a month and a half later?
I think what's quite what was shocking to us all, I guess, is that Europe didn't really deal with it, but the countries suddenly didn't listen to their neighboring countries anymore, and didn't allow. Suddenly we have these borders locked down. I'm here in Switzerland, well, for many reasons, but one is that if I wanted to go back home to Berlin, where I actually live, I would have to spend 2 weeks in quarantine, and for a long while I'm not even sure if I would have been able to cross that border. And these borders are so random in a time where we associate ourselves probably much more to our peers in our hobbies, passions, opinions, maybe cities, maybe regions, but not countries. I mean, what does a Bavarian have in common with somebody in Berlin? But for exact these reasons, I am normally actually rather a pro-European nature, I would say, in the sense that as I always wanted Switzerland, my country, to join the European Union.
Because you still wanted to now, at this moment, to join the European Union, even now? I
would want so, yes, but I'm not even asking the majority I mean, I know that there's no majority to be found here in Switzerland, but not because people are critical of European politics in itself, just because of they're greedy enough here in Switzerland that they don't want to lose the money that they get, because the Swiss franc at the moment is benefiting incredibly because of the Corona crisis. We're almost at 1-on-1 Swiss franc to the European, and obviously the banks here are hoarding still a lot of money of people that escape their tax paying in countries elsewhere, and Switzerland would have to open up to those things. I do totally believe that we should very slowly add power within Europe to the European Commission. I think the big failure of the European Union is that too much power was hoarded inside the Ministerrat, where each country basically goes to kind of fight for its national stakes that they're fighting for, and then they're leaving it again with kind of giving press conferences to their national press. Yes, that's what we got. The Commission is different, but the Commission doesn't have enough power. In the Commission, you have actually a very good organization of experts that normally can produce very productive legislations.
Yeah. Well, so maybe we should look at your first show, the State One, Top Secret International. We can watch a short video and then talk about it and also the topic the show deals with.
So this is a project, it's called Top Secret International State One, and there we, as actually in all of these projects, we tried to not, put it on a big stage and blame it. That's an easy way to handle, or it's the classic way that theater has looked at. So in our first piece, which deals with the intelligence industry, we were wondering, how can we kind of put you into that role of a secret agent in a time where we realized, I mean, you have Snowden, Assange right behind you there on your bookshelf.
And don't forget.
Thanks to them and other whistleblowers, at some point, we suddenly had an insight into an industry which normally is supposed to be working for our countries, but we talked to people that work in the commission of the parliament that is supposed to control the secret services, and they told us that they don't get access to the documents actually, although. So this is one of many problems to be talked about. We wanted not to talk about it on a big stage. We wanted the people to step into a role. And here I start the video slowly. You see how our audience.
We are almost ready.
So the audience you see here is going into a museum. It's the Glyptothek in Munich. And you start. You receive a kind of a headphone as very normal tool in museums these days, and you start walking between the normal visitors of this museum. Just that the voice doesn't exactly only talk about the objects you see.
Go into the next room.
By all appearances, you are a perfectly normal museum visitor. You do what people do in museums. You walk around, you look at the exhibits, you learn about their history, but actually, you're here to learn something about something whose nature is invisible.
Every person is a spy to some degree. because everyone mines for information about their friends, colleagues, and sometimes that information is kept secret.
There is at least one piece of information about every person on this globe that could mean their demise, that could make them susceptible to blackmail, force them to act.
The people making decisions based on the intelligence community products are manipulated completely by which of those products they are shown. If they make the wrong choice, you get Iraq. If they make a worse choice, you get nuclear war.
Now, a question for you.
If you have a person in front of you who knows the code to deactivate a bomb in a room with 50 people in it, would you resort to violence at the last minute in the hope of getting the code? If the answer is yes, hold the notebook vertically over your head on my signal so that the arrow points to your toes.
Interesting. So, you would resort to violence.
So from here on, you start to realize that actually in this little notebook that you were giving me at the entrance, there seems to be an intelligent device which reacts actually to the way you respond to questions like the one we just heard. And from there, it's the script actually has multiple, it's kind of a tree of decisions in which the piece can further develop.
In order to possibly save the lives of other human beings.
Do you still have that piece of paper where you wrote down what you were afraid of? Try to give it to your contact without arousing attention. Without speaking. Your meeting will release another document.
In the boiler room, you find the screen. Look at the screen more closely.
Now you are looking at the museum from above. Every face represents an information carrier. Now you'd have to...
Downstairs and left in room number 1.
Yes, exactly. To be seen on the left with an image. You are looking at the museum from above, the way that intelligence looks at a country's citizens. Every movement is a piece of information.
Okay, so great, thank you for this video. And one thing that I thought about while watching it and while reading about the piece is the thing which happened after 9/11 with the global surveillance project, which started, of course, from the United States and Edward Snowden exposing the whole thing to the public. And then I always remember his quote whenever when I tell them that their data is being used in lots of kinds of ways. First for corporations to use them, to sell them to advertising agencies, but then in a way also to make the future of human behavior actually become, in a sense, different than it is now. And then I always remember his, when he says, arguing that you don't care about the right to privacy because you have nothing to hide is no different than saying you don't care about freedom of speech because you have nothing to say. And then I always think about whistleblowers, you know, about why would somebody want to be a whistleblower today when we know how whistleblowers end up in lots of so-called democratic countries, like Julian Assange, who is held at the Harsh Belmarsh prison in London now. You know, like it's called the British Guantanamo. We have Snowden, who is after revealing the secret files of the US now in Moscow, and he cannot return back to his own country. Chelsea Manning, of course, the former US soldier who exposed the Iraq and Afghan war logs. So what do you think, what's your stake on the future of whistleblowers, and what do you think, why would people want to in a way say the truth to the world if the world doesn't want to hear it?
Yeah, actually, it's funny you only quote American examples of people that have been jailed and
Well, Julian Assange is not American, actually.
Yeah, but let's say the pursuing country behind him is American, and because the whistleblower laws in the US are actually more protective for whistleblowers than in Germany. So in Germany, that obviously concerns matters on a much lower level, which is probably one which we're very often affected when we're talking about corruption in middle-sized companies. For instance, in Germany, there's not even a real protection where you would call a central ombudsman, I'm not sure what's the English word for that, like a position which then would be granting your safety if you have something to say about a wrong behavior within your company.
But what about the Patriotic Act? That I think it's a very I don't think that the whistleblowers actually in America are not going to be prosecuted by the Espionage Act and the Patriotic Act, and if Julian Assange would be prosecuted in the United States, he would get I think more than 150 years in prison. So I wouldn't say that these laws are good for.
You're totally right there. I'm saying that this on that level, obviously it's a political decision and there's no protection whatsoever. It's clear that the whole Assange case is kind of what are the moving powers behind that. There's no discussion. But where I'm saying this is on a smaller level. I mean, the protection within companies with little corruptions in, for instance, the construction industry, to mention another topic we've dealt with on our project State 1 to 4. It's a typical case where I'm shocked about the amount of corruption that is very embedded in Germany, in France, in Switzerland even here. We had a case in the little valley up in Grison, where the entire valley was collaborating in distributing, public call tenders. The companies were dividing them between them. And when one of them stepped out of it, they managed to put him into psychiatry. Mr. Quadroni was the name of the guy. And only years after this story was unveiled. And he, for instance, he tried to whistleblow to a federal institution here in Switzerland, which didn't react for 3 years, I think. So he was put into psychiatry. Even the police collaborated in this whole complot. It's a story that you would, traditionally as a Swiss person, you would think we're talking about some African or Chinese dictatorship. Yeah, this is a big gap, and I think the problem of the whole security industry, the intelligence industry, being a self-feeding complex that inherently constantly tries to evade any kind of control, is a danger. And now we're discussing all over Europe, the new apps that might surveil the people that are corona infected. And it's very important to look very exactly at where the data are stored. There is in the moment a discussion between Germany and Switzerland. Different researchers are developing different apps, and the Swiss version is trying not to have the state not give the data to the state, but it's more a peer-to-peer system that informs you if the person you're coming close to or meeting has had contact with somebody infected. Whereas I think the German system tried to centralize those information, which is obviously dangerous, can be abused if wanted to.
Yeah, well, yeah, I think that this corona crisis, as the second biggest global crisis after 9/11, will bring another layer to the global surveillance project. they are even, of course, telling us this. We will probably have to be vaccinated at some point, and then these vaccines will probably be somewhere in some kind of an app. We will be measure temperature whenever we get on before getting on a plane, which happens all the time. Well, in China, it happens even now. So I think that it will be an interesting thing. What will happen with the global surveillance project after this pandemic? Will we go like into some kind of a techno-totalitarianism with complete new stake on biopolitics? We will see. But yes, that is actually the topic of the first show, the State Free. So we can get to that maybe afterwards. But you mentioned the construction sites, and that is the topic of your of the second show, Society Under Construction, State 2. And for me, the interesting thing, of course, the whole situation. You will tell us about how you were thinking of construction sites being like microcosmos, where you can see all the paradoxes of our contemporary society. I was also thinking that during this pandemic, I don't know what was the situation in Switzerland, but in Serbia, at one point, we were in total lockdown. Even some days 24/7 we were in lockdown during the whole weekends, during the days from 5:00 p.m. we were in lockdown. Of course, the social distancing and everything, but the only places where you can see, where you could see all of these things not being obeyed were actually the construction sites. They were working 24/7 every day, all the construction sites all over Belgrade. You know, of course, because you've been here, that we have a huge construction site, Belgrade waterfront. It was, of course, you could see workers without any kind of protection, without any kind of masks working. So the profit had to move on. All of us, the society was under lockdown, but the construction was, but the other society, the one that has to work, was under construction. So yes, if you could tell us what was the situation in Switzerland with this, and also why was this the inspiration for this State 2 part?
Yeah, I mean, just reacting on this, I think it's very interesting to observe now in Switzerland and in Germany, we're discussing which parts of society are when allowed to open, and each when in the beginning, actually here even construction sites stopped. As soon as it's about opening, each one of these corners of society have their lobbies pushing forward to get permission. So in southern Germany, in some places, the car shops were open first. In other places, furniture shops, because they had the better lobby, were the first ones to open. And obviously, theater has a very weak lobby there, and that's why the politicians just stay closed. Where the churches quite soon managed, apparently, they have a better lobby to get permissions to open again. So that's a typical phenomenon of post-democracy, because what I think the politicians should have done, or should do also now in the near future, is to just basically define what's the distance you need to maintain from each other, 2 meters, 1 meter, whatever it is, and impose the hygienic kind of rules on these places. And if whoever you are, if you are even a sect, if you are a theater, or if you're a museum, if you can guarantee those distances, why don't you allow these people then to open their places? So you're not, because you're not surrendering to the pressure groups that seem to have all this power. Because who tells me I'm interested in having the economy boom first? Maybe I'm more interested in having social centers work because they might be more important, or other preferences. So. But to talk a bit more concretely about Society Under Construction, it's a project where I try to look at a construction site, yeah, as a society model, and as a place where a lot of illegitimate interests are subverting against the democratic powers. If you look at the mayors that get elected for promises about certain public public spaces that should be built, and then you go, for instance, to a place like in Cannes. There is this MIPIM, the biggest investor fair of the world, actually, and you see how there the cities are looking for capital, and they kind of just basically saying whatever those investors that meet the representatives of the city, whatever, come, bring your money, and we will find a deal, is basically the way that you see those lobbyings to happen. The way we decided to make this piece incorporate or to make our audience incorporate these positions that have very different interests, from the lowest worker to the urban planners up. It's a piece where we transform the theater into a kind of a construction site, where you step for 10 minutes into the role of different players of this. Let's watch the trailer. So the audiences are equipped with these headphones that are actually inside helmets. In some of them,
Diese Großbaustelle wird einen Heißhunger nach Sand entwickeln. Sand, der gebraucht wird für die Aufbereitung des Baugrundes, aber auch zur Landgewinnung.
Sie suchen alle möglichst nach sicheren Anlagealternativen zum Kapitalmarkt. So, die Situation ist also heute so, dass wir hier einfach zu viel Liquidität im Raum haben. Zu viel Geld.
Die städtischen Mitarbeiter bekommen von der Unternehmerin das in solchen Fällen übliche Schmiergeld in der Baubranche. 1% der Auftragssumme, 50.000 €. Ich übergebe die erste Rate.
Fresh Money nennen wir das. Jetzt kommt das Spiel. Jeder Hunderter steht für 10 Millionen €.
Nicht so bei den Ameisen. Ameisen wissen genau, was sie tun müssen, und die bauen genau in der Zeit, in der sie auch einen neuen Bereich des Nestes benötigen.
Wissen Sie, woran kann man erkennen, ob auf einer Baustelle Schwarzarbeiter sind? Wenn ohne Gerüst gearbeitet wird. Weil von einem Gerüst kann man nämlich nicht so schnell fliehen, falls kommt jemand in Kontrolle.
So basically the people you see interacting or working here, they're all audience. It's a piece for up to 300, 400 spectators, divided into 8 groups, and you live the same loop again and again, but always from a different perspective. And whomever you talk to, the explanation about why things go wrong is a different one.
Vielleicht kennt mich der eine oder andere aus der Presse. Ich habe die Entrauungsanlage am Berliner Flughafen geplant. Und die soll an alten Schuld sein.
Nehmen Sie die Tafel mit 2 Händen und wedeln Sie ganz kräftig dem Vordermann richtig viel Wind in den Rücken.
Sie sehen, überall auf der Baustelle streitet man sich, dass es qualmt. Jetzt sind Sie der Angegriffene. Sie sind jetzt angegriffen. Was müssen Sie jetzt machen? Blocken, Handkante.
Right, so we're back.
Yeah. Yes. So can you just tell me one thing? While you were doing this project, did the audience change roles? Could they be also one role and then the other, or they just got fixed roles that they would do from the beginning to the end of the show?
And you change every 10 minutes. I call that kind of works simultaneity pieces that allow you to see a complex model of a complex society question, to see it from different positions. We've developed a number of pieces that work that way. We did situation rooms about weapon trafficking, where you're also changing a position, and every time you are in a different role, you understand, identify maybe even with a position, but then when you're on the other hand, somebody that works for Transparency International, then suddenly everything you've heard from the property developer might look very different. Or when you're when you're listening to this private entrepreneur that worked for the Berlin airport, you might agree with him when he says, well, a private developer would have finished the Berlin airport by far. Maybe you know that it's since 10 years that we were waiting for the finishing of this airport. But then again, you swap side and you're listening to this lawyer you saw in the end in teaching the audience through karate fights how to defend the public hand against the money, extra cost money that the private stakeholders in the construction sites normally ask, and that make costs exceed enormously in the end. So for us, it's often an important point in our pieces that we don't try to simplify and say, you know, like you said before, democracy is dead. We would never say that.
I didn't say it. I didn't say it. It was a quote by Boris Boden. I asked you a question.
Yeah. No, I'm saying.
Do you think that democracy is dead? It was question mark.
Yeah. And it can be productive to, you know, raise polemic in that direction, but we try not to make people come out of our pieces with, okay, they're right, we have to, you know, rather the idea, and it obviously my background was a journalist before I started making theater, and so my understanding of a communication process is to try to make a dialectic process where contradicting positions make you gradually come to your own view of a thing.
And do you have a conversation with the audience after these kinds of shows, these immersive shows, or do they just leave the theater after the show?
Well, actually, in this piece, we distribute at the very end free beer to everybody, because the construction worker who is originally from Romania says, well, and has worked many years illegally in Germany. That's the story he talks about in the piece. And then he says, well, in the end, let's have a beer after construction is over. And
like the construction workers, yeah.
See whether we can get into business about jobs, or obviously people then have a lot of also personal questions and questions about the piece. So normally actually they stay half an hour longer around.
Yeah. Okay, I will skip the first part, third part, not because it's not interesting, but because you actually didn't do the third part of the show, and we already talked about the dystopian version of global surveillance. The third part is called The Dreaming Collective, Stepping Sheep, State Free. And I will move on to Davos State of the World, State 4. For me, it's very interesting. Now the audience will also be able to see a short video of it. We are now at the top of the pyramid of this society building state. We are at the World Economic Forum in Davos at the Swiss Alps. Meeting the world's elite, the CEOs of very important corporations. So we are in the middle of the power that is, of course, in the hands of the rich. And so let's see maybe first the video, and then we can talk a little bit about it.
Yeah, so again, well, I don't know if everybody knows, Davos has this World Economic Forum that is normally at the end of January held in Davos, and military for a lot of public costs is protecting the whole valley actually against people who want to demonstrate against certain people that are there. Trump was there this year, Merkel is there every year. So it's always a big moment where on one hand, people are trying to, I mean, the organizers of the web are trying to make these people reflect on problems that should be dealt globally, but in the same moment, those that invite, which are the shareholders of this, or the members, the paying members that pay a lot of money to be there, they obviously have also a hidden agenda to make business there, first of all. And what we wanted to, in Switzerland, you normally don't see, you cannot be there, so you have a very distant view on it. And we said, what if we make our audience step into the role again of of some of these stakeholders, as they're normally called in Davos. And so we distribute all they're sitting in a kind of a round, almost parliamentary setup, and they find under their seats names and biographies, little booklets, as you see them here with them, where they suddenly are now a CEO of a big company. Some of them very known, others not.
Zeigen mir bitte Ihre Rolle, ja, super. Den Namen, ja, super. Sehr gut. Es gibt eine kurze Biografie auf Seite 3. Das ist die offizielle Biografie auf Ihre Rolle in Davos. Also, finden Sie heraus, wer Sie sind.
So the people start reading in these biographies, and some of them are very interesting, some of them are very powerful. Some of them have more people depend on them and more money under them than country presidents. Here you see the display around those fake mountains of all the present, what is it, I think 190 people we had in the game. And at some point she asks, like, who of you are men? Okay.
Und wer ist eine Frau?
So that's the big majority, you see.
Sehen Sie, letztes Jahr waren alle Frauen zusammen nur 12,5% der globalen Wirtschaftselite in Davos. Leider ist das die Realität auf den alle Chefetagen rund um die Welt. Die Mehrheit von ihnen sind white, middle-aged, straight men.
So that's
I think the video is stuck for me. Maybe it's not for you and for the rest of the people. But check it if it's
how to check that. Maybe I just let the thing stop once and you didn't see it. She was asking who of you are man and who are women.
I heard the voice, but I didn't.
I see. Well, anyway, she kind of, people hold up their let me try to share it again. So basically you can see the people sitting in this big round bowl, and do we see it now? So here are all the men, do you see it?
Yeah.
Oh yeah, okay.
Und wer ist eine Frau?
Yeah, now it's okay.
Sehen Sie, letztes Jahr waren alle Frauen zusammen nur 12,5% der globalen Wirtschaftselite in Davos. Leider ist das die Realität auf den alle Chefetagen rund um die Welt. Die Mehrheit von ihnen sind white, middle-aged, straight men.
And so that's her talking about the gender distribution, which obviously reminds us of what Budin said in your quote about democracies where by whom, like who participates in the decision making, and maybe in parliaments gradually the percentages are rising of women being represented, but obviously in the boards of the big companies that have maybe more power than the presidents we vote for are, as she said, 87% male, at least in the representation in Davos. And then later in the piece, we have a former UN worker talking to the people.
Und zeigen Sie uns die farbige Fläche. Ja, alle bitte die farbige Fläche zeigen. Also blau heißt, die sind aus Europa. Viele aus Europa. Rot, die vielen Nordamerikaner. Schwarz heißt, sie sind aus Asien.
So you see that the countries also obviously are totally unequally redistributed in Davos. There's hardly anybody from Africa. And then she does change the picture and shows the United Nations.
In der UNO sieht es anders aus. Jetzt gehen wir in die UNO. Also, wissen Sie, was das ist? Das ist die General Assembly Hall in New York. Also bitte drehen Sie das Buch um und zeigen Sie mir eine Fahne.
Obviously, and there she starts to talk about how she worked for the United Nations, and there obviously each country has one vote, and when we talk about democracy, it's also often, unfortunately, very slow instrument, but very equally distributed instruments, because countries even like Andorra can have their say in the United Nations. And if you mentioned Cuba, Fidel Castro's speech in the 60s moved people when he spoke in the United Nations, when he was
Ich habe in meinem Leben an Hunderten von Sitzungen teilgenommen. Ich bin in der Mitte gesessen und habe die Landesschilder umgeschaut, genauso wie.
Yeah, so then she starts to get, maybe that's enough of the piece, a little extract here.
And so what do you think at the end, when this pandemic is over, if it's ever over, is the power going to go to the people, as John Lennon said, or is the power going to stay in the hand of the corporations and banks and the elite that it is now? Will it go to normal? Will it be business as usual? Or do you see maybe some kind of a change in the system in the future?
Well, actually, when we look at how the crisis was dealt with, I have the feeling we saw a shift towards the power in governmental institutions and away from private capital saying for a short bit, which is a win, if you want, so partly, and maybe a short-term win, but I believe that it changes also a bit the perception in the voters' minds if they see, okay, actually in certain moments we really have to listen to the government and not to the products that some of us believe more in. But the big question is obviously how much, you know, the World Health Organization took suddenly quite a big role in this whole situation, and in some parts in a good way, but it also in some parts in a very bad way. For instance, they wouldn't allow, I think until the very end, Taiwan, which was the country that was mentioned often as the role model of how to deal with the crisis, but they didn't allow them in because China has too much power in that institution and doesn't recognize Taiwan as an independent country. So there are a lot of problems within these governmental institutions, but in the moment I see them rather on the rise in this situation. The problem will be that they obviously also have to indebt themselves very strongly, because promising, you know, to all these institutions, hospitals, but also social care institutions, at least in Germany, there was a certain distribution even to independent artists, which are suffering a lot in the crisis, obviously, because they can't perform and so on. But at least in Germany and Switzerland, they were supported in a quite fast and non-bureaucratic way by the governments.
Yeah, we have a problem that now our government, which said that it would support the artists, well, the freelance artists, now the budget for these independent artists from the government is zero, actually. The president said that it will be changed, but I don't believe a word he says. So yeah, and I know that some European countries, of course, the richer ones, had a different way of dealing with it.
Yeah, that's an important really thing to make you have to make yourself heard there and insist on that, you know.
Yeah, well, of course, yeah.
I totally understand that it's a tough fight for many countries which are not as in that democratic way organized. I mean,
yeah, but it's a fight for the privileged, I have to say, in a way, which brings me to your next project, which actually you reminded me of, the Calcutta in a Box. It's a project from 2008, so 12 years ago. But you were thinking about this project because, of course, it in a way can reflect to this situation, because it is a theater that is not actually in a theater, not even in any kind of art space, but it's in a room, it's in an apartment. You buy a ticket to, instead of going to a theater, you go to a room by yourself, and then the phone rings and a person from Calcutta actually answers your phone, and you have an international phone call with the person that works on the telephone line in Calcutta. So can you tell us something about this project? And it is very interesting with all of us being now isolated and having all these artistic, if we can call them, experiences online.
Yeah, it's really, we created it out of an interest into the call centers that are outsourcing jobs to India, at least at the time, very much so, more than 10 years ago when we created the first version of it. And now suddenly, when so many of us are working from home offices, we find ourselves in a kind of a similar situation. So maybe we look a bit at the trailer to see what happens then to the audience when they are picking up the phone in this office into which they are sent.
Can I just ask you, are they real workers or they're not actors?
They are working in a call center, let's say.
They are working in, so yeah.
Oh.
Hello, hi. Is this Dr. Maria Pelević speaking?
Yes, it is.
Hallo Ilse, ich heiße Julio. Ich verstehe, dass Sie ein bisschen schwierig aussprechen,
Hello,
aber es gibt
hi.
eine
Is this
Karte
Dr.
da.
Maria Pelević speaking?
Okay, tell me, do you
Yes,
know
it
where
is.
I am right Hallo Ilse, ich heiße Julio.
Yeah, I know.
Oh,
Ich verstehe, dass Sie ein bisschen schwierig aussprechen, aber es gibt
sorry,
keine Visiten.
there's something wrong here because it's kind of playing it double. Let me try again. Something's wrong here.
Hello, hi. Is this Dr. Maria Pelević speaking?
For some reason, this video is not playing the way it. Give me a second. This is live fixing here. Oops.
Maybe you can just play it in the small
Yeah.
box. Yeah.
Yeah.
We don't have to have it full screen. If you play it on.
I think I'll get it now here.
Hello, hi. Is this Dr. Maria Pelević speaking?
Yes, it is.
Hallo Ilse, ich heiße Julio. Ich verstehe, dass Sie ein bisschen schwierig aussprechen, aber es gibt eine Visitenkarte da auf dem Tisch. Okay, tell me, do you know where I am right now?
Yeah, I know that you are in Calcutta.
Yeah, that's true. Actually, the more or less approximate distance between us right now is 7,500 kilometers.
You are very far, but your voice is very near. As said my mother, you stay where you stay?
On the topmost floor. Hello.
On the top of, yeah.
Hi, I'm waving my hat. See?
Yeah. I see you.
Hello.
I see you.
Okay.
Well, I guess someone's looking at me right now.
Yeah, somebody is.
I see a picture on the screen with an eye.
Okay. Oh, I didn't tell you what my name means.
No, what does your name mean?
Su means goat. Naina means
Yes.
eye. So in Sanskrit, the word means she who sees very well. See?
She who sees very well.
Okay. Like so.
Is that your eye?
Yes. It's stretching all the way to Copenhagen.
So until here, what we see is basically it's one audience at a time, and you're really alone, and you can quite direct also parts of the conversation, which at some point will be quite personal, at some point political, at some point economical. Maybe there's a certain dramaturgy which in the first 40 minutes you're totally only listening to the person on the other side, and then comes this moment where suddenly this camera connection is established, which was at the time still quite a new thing, and then you see suddenly this person that became so intimate to you, and that triggered, I forgot to say that, in your space, it triggered sound files, it printed out, they printed out through USB connections, like a kind of, we had a system through which they could print in the European offices things. They would, then suddenly you had this person as a
you know the little wooden box with the plant in it?
Yes.
You just lift the whole thing up. Hello. Hi.
Hi.
Now you enter the stage.
Hi. Hi.
Hello. Do you see me?
Yes.
Yeah. It's very good.
Und mit diesem Schlüssel jetzt kannst du die unterste Schublade öffnen.
So on this moment, you suddenly realize that the people on the other side were really in a big call center. And when you see the people working here for us, which were people that had some of them actually acting background also, but they did work during months for us in a call center, but they told you about what the other people were doing, and they were selling, I think, mobile phones to customers in Australia. But we had a very interesting being together in this floor where, because our performers, they had much more fun, obviously, than the ones that needed to sell things, because they were exchanging very personal things. And here you can see even there was things
So let's
hidden.
dance to this music. Yeah, okay. Come a little closer. Okay, yeah, all right. I'm putting my foot forward, you put your feet backward, and now we turn. Okay? All right? And voila.
This is strange without feeling bodies.
Thanks a lot. Let's dance.
I've had a lovely time talking to you. And I just hope you have a nice evening.
Have a nice evening. Bye-bye.
So we can imagine today looking at a piece like this very easily.
Yeah.
From our
So
home.
we are actually thinking about developing a Corona version where that would be called Calcutta at home, because obviously the call centers in India are also closed now because of the same crisis, which I think is an interesting phenomenon, that people around the world we're all experiencing the same thing. And but what is it if a call center employee is doing home office? So that would be the kind of beginning of this new project, which we're thinking to develop for the very situation now, where you would obviously then not see an office when the computer, the video connection is there, but you see also a home, just like the home which all of you are in right now. But it obviously looks quite different in India.
Yeah. And if we go from our little isolated spaces to maybe even near future, to society which will also be inhabited by humanoid robots. One of your latest shows, called Uncanny Valley from 2019, deals with these questions. It deals with robots, with machines, with us living with machines, us being machines. You actually made a humanoid robot out of your playwright. That is my dream. Thomas Melle got to have himself be made as a robot. So can you tell us something about this project? Why did you want to deal with this topic? What were you inspired by? and how did the whole process look like?
Yeah, I mean, when we're talking about call centers these days, I guess half of the call centers that existed 10 years ago probably are replaced now by voice recognition softwares connected to speech generators and algorithms in the middle. So there is a number of calls that I've done to service hotlines where I'm not even exactly sure anymore, is it a human or not? And then these voices normally force me to speak very clearly so that the voice recognition software can detect what I'm saying. And this is happening now. Now, humanoids is maybe a little bit of a sci-fi version still. Smaller ones have become reality. And but I wondered, like, what happens if you copy really yourself. So here's a little bit of the trailer of this. So here you see the making of the robot on the theater side, because they created a mask copy of Thomas Melle, which then on stage reflects on how this was done. A very complex process using, in this phase, for instance, many different human hairs, but also some animal hairs to play the hairs of Thomas Melle.
In old people's homes, machines are now being used that look like humans. Studies show that these humans are good for us humans. Machines can be friends as long as they look very similar to us. The eyes of such machines must be able to look at us. Their voices must come from their lips. Their arms must move smoothly. Their skin should feel soft. What kind of movements do you expect from the person you are talking to? Do you like it when they respond to your momentum? When they look you in the eye while listening and say, mm-hmm? In doing so, you show your conversational partner that you are on the same wavelength, that you feel empathy. Scientists call this attunement. You make the same sounds, like in the Pythagorean world harmony, the music of spheres, which we all share without hearing it. Is there a difference between private and public gestures? Which gestures are actually mine? The Japanese roboticist Masahiro Mori calls this scale of variation, whereby a robot resembles a human, but not enough, therefore causing aversion and alienation, the uncanny valley. If you've come to see an actor, you're in the wrong place. And that's why this lecture is not about me, but about you.
So maybe we have to say that who Thomas Melle is. He's a writer, because I'm not sure in Serbia he's very known, or if his books are translated. And he wrote a very important book that is called The World in My Back, and where he's reflecting on his own bipolar condition. He has this psychological problem to shift from maniac to depression, and to control such an irregularity. He would on one hand be quite happy to have a robot standing in for him when he has to go public. That's a way to deal with the disease, but on the other hand, we all know this tendency that we try to outsource any kind of problem that we have to an algorithm. Like, as soon as we have a little disease, we will consult probably the internet and ask. So the majority what can I do when I believe the majority more than myself, and that's in the end believing the programmers more than ourselves. So that's how this fascinating thing that you're looking at, and the audience often starts to doubt, is it a human or not, because he really quite is very naturalistic looking, but at some point it shifts and you suddenly start to realize it's actually more also a performance about me and about how much, if I grew up being conditioned by things that I was told to and not to, am I then, where is my freedom actually in my so individual being?
Yeah, and for me also one issue that raised, because the show is uploaded also on your website, so people can watch it. So I watched the video, and it was very, in a way, emotional, of course, because you were watching a robot and you have empathy with it, which is really strange. But the other thing that I was also thinking about was that the safety question, like this robot in this new world we will be living in, with this fear of maybe other viruses or who knows what. This robot cannot transmit a disease. It does not need health insurance. This robot is also very cute, so you can have a communication with him and even think that he's a normal person, but at the end you don't have to pay him anything. Can you imagine a dystopia where we will have workers that are now even working in terrible conditions and underpaid be completely in the near future in a way switched by robots? Do you think that some kind of a scenario can happen? You were just saying that now when you have a call, answer a call center, sometimes it even happens to you now that you get a robot on the line, the other side.
Well, I mean, you were asking if they replace workers. I mean, obviously that's what they have, what robots have been invented for, and have been doing so since almost 100 years now, since the T model was invented. They have been replacing workers. But that's the traditional robot that doesn't really look human. That's the precise machine that can do certain things better than us, precision and so on. The question is, I guess, how far do we want to have them in places where empathy plays a role? And I think this performance is troubling because it makes you empathize somehow, even if you know very well in the beginning it's a robot that I'm looking at. After a while, you start to identify with him, and kind of when he moves the hand, and even in our rehearsal process, I sometimes, like when the head suddenly went down, I was like, oh no, like it hurts me physically to see him broken. We had problems where he broke a leg actually at some point, or an arm actually, and it was both empathy for me and in the same moment fear as an owner of the robot, like, oh no, how can we have the next show working? And with these tools, I guess a place where we might expect robots to come in is taking care of the old, which, especially in a situation these days where it's dangerous to take care of the old, dangerous for the old, that are the ones to be affected maybe earlier than others by the corona. So it might even be good to have robots there, but what does it mean then when you start replacing them in sex bots? It's a big industry that is growing very much. Man saying, well, she doesn't complain, she always is there when I want. And is that the kind of substitute that we want? Perfection, non-resistance, or is maybe mistake as Alan Turing then towards the end of his life claimed, and it's kind of a second dramaturgical layer of the show, is a mistake that what we're actually looking for. I myself these days, I often suffer not so much from being only together with my partner. I'm happy with her in the confinement. We had actually intensive kind of times that we might not have had otherwise. But what I miss is the randomness of incidental meetings that kind of has come to know it doesn't happen anymore. And I think we need randomness. We cannot just make ourselves more efficient. And there is the danger in the blind trust in algorithms, I guess.
Yeah, and also it reminds me of the movie of Spike Jonze, Her, where the main character, Joaquin Phoenix, falls in love with a AI system where he gets the perfect woman that is perfectly capable of being everything that he wants, because she uses his data to actually be like the perfect partner. And that brings me to the issue of also that's what you were telling, that's the most dangerous thing that can happen with AI and robotics, that it will come in the sphere of our everyday lives and human behavior and our relationships. It starts with the Tinder and Grindr and all of these stuff where you can see if somebody matches you and then do it very quickly without falling in love, in a way, as Badu would say. The love without the fall. But I think with all these machines and gadgets, the thing is the safety. Like we don't have time to be hurt in this world. We just have to play it safe. And then the robot, also these sex toys that in Japan they make, that they look perfectly like
yeah. I mean, the movie Her was actually, it came out, I think, 2 years after we started doing remote X tours, and maybe some of you have seen the tour we did through Belgrade or through other cities. It's a tour where you're trusting, very much like in the film, an artificial intelligence voice that is in the beginning also female, that later it changes. And these feeling comfortable when everything moves perfectly smooth is a seduction point in this piece, but it's also in our lives, I guess. We're happy to have digital assistants pre-selecting our emails. We're happy to have the algorithm decide for us already, like which out of those products are probably the best of us, as long as it works. But then suddenly when you get these wrong indications, then suddenly those moments when you realize, okay, actually it can be quite dangerous. And when we're in the next step in these Chinese smart cities where our social rating skill might decide if we can board a flight or not, or if we can leave the house or not, then as the corona algorithms in the very soon future might decide for us, then yeah, mind your programmers.
Yeah. We have a couple of questions from the audience. So Jovana Karaulic asks you, after this crisis, we can think about theater in between politics and policies with the new social and economic framework. Can you help us to understand how these new policies will affect theater practices?
I think it's a very interesting question, and I'm just starting to deal with that, because the politicians in the first hand, they were saying, okay, theaters are in Germany not going to open before, I think in the moment the policy is 31st of August or July, I'm not sure, like very far away. And politicians, what do they know of theater? They have been to big opera shows and big musical shows, and they think of theater as a thing where 700 or 1,000 people sit together, and obviously that is dangerous at the moment, and can probably not even happen in September or October. Probably it'll take until the end of the year. That's what I hear at the moment. But what I think we, the artists, should now develop is, and we have a practice, the off scene has a big practice in doing performances that can happen under other conditions. For instance, Remote is a piece which I still hope that we can do the shows that we've promised to do in Istanbul in, I think, September, if my team is even allowed to travel to Turkey then. But it's a typical show, you know, you're walking with headphones and you are actually you can be distanced from each other. Why wouldn't this be allowed, or why can we not? And that is what I'm right now here starting to develop a piece about in Lausanne in the theater. These empty spaces, empty theaters are super interesting because in a way they contain all our memories of having been those social hubs where, you know, common empathy of tears together, applause together, they have happened there. And it's like they are all there. And now when our museums are going to open, I think here in Switzerland already next week, museums are allowed to open again because they can maintain the social distances alive. So why don't we call our theaters then, why don't we turn them into exhibition places of the performances that have happened there? So I think we should push for these small formats that the French scene has been good in developing to be allowed soon, as long as they respect those distances. And I think this can be a real door, and we might, I mean, it has been hard for me to cancel a whole tour of the Cuban show I have, Granma, which is a big stage show. It will, for a long time, not happen. A whole ballet production that I was supposed to do next year was canceled because it's a big show. Some things might be totally impossible for very long. We might prepare ourselves, and we better think now what else could within this frame be possible.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. And I think that some small formats can work for another couple of months, probably, who knows, maybe even a year. We have no idea if the other pandemic crisis will arise in a couple of months. So yeah, I'm completely agree with you on this. So we have another question by Chedomir Popovic. Why is Switzerland different than the rest of us? Is it because of direct democracy or efficient secret service?
Well, why is it different? Because it has always tried to be, I'm not sure it's so different than the rest of us. I mean, the Swiss people hopefully are not. They're just, I think, greedy enough to close the doors to certain bigger social interactions with the neighboring countries, which has its history in the bank secrets that they wanted to keep until the US finally forced the Swiss to open up certain of these legislations, but not all of them. Maybe, if I may say, I'm very good in saying bad things about my own country, if I may say something, a positive side of it is maybe the what we call here Konkordanzdemokratie. It's a kind of a democracy that doesn't shift every electoral period from left to right as soon as the coalition has the majority, but the ministers are kind of distributed on a longer level. They have to collaborate in a different way, and that has allowed a bit more differentiated politics. It might have helped politicians not to be so much reacting just on the most, on the next poll that indicates people want this, and then immediately they shift their opinion just to keep the majority. But I'm not sure if the question was heading that way or the other. Anyway, I would be very happy if the borders of Switzerland would open up and it would integrate itself more. I mean, we do cooperate with big, like United Nations have one of their headquarters in Geneva, and so there is international cooperation, but not enough on a great level.
No. So we're reaching the end of our conversation, and as we agreed, I would finish with asking the audience to, after we finish this conversation, try to do this 6-minute audio tour for your home called 9 Movements that you developed. The link will be in the chat. Philip will post it, I guess now. In the
let me
chat.
just say 2 words about it.
And yeah,
before.
I wanted you to say something about it before we do that, of course.
So if you click to that link, don't immediately start it. The best way is to open it from a mobile device so that you can move, and then you have to put on your headphones, because it's a little audio tour that I created because I understood, okay, I'll be spending a lot of time in my room here and maybe in the next door room, and I started thinking, why couldn't our homes be the stage design of a little piece, as different as they are? So it's not completely site specific, but on the other hand, there are certain things that you probably also find in your own apartment. So before listening to it, make yourself download it on your mobile phone or something, put your headphones on, and then follow the instructions. And I hope you'll have refreshing 6 minutes standing up for once from the computer and moving through your flat.
Thank you, Stefan, so much for joining the Philosophical Theater tonight. And I hope we will see some of your next shows on at the Bitte Festival, which I hope will happen this autumn, as it regularly does. And yeah, good luck with all your future shows. And thanks for being with us tonight.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.